Hey everyone, this is Panos, founder of PNOE. We're excited to have again today with us Gilles Essiembre, who's one of our valued affiliates. He has a lot of experience with the PNOE Metabolic Analyzer, crafting personalized nutrition and exercise programs for his clients. And with us today, we also have Dan Gillis, who is one of Gilles' customers. Dan is going to be the subject of discussion for today's video, and we're going to be going through the work that he has done with Gilles, uh, going through the before and after PNOE metabolic tests, and also focusing a lot on the intervention that Gilles put together based on his initial test. So it's going to be a great opportunity for people to understand how our affiliates are using the information they get from the metabolic analyzer in order to craft programs which then yield measurable differences for people. Without further ado, let's start with a little bit of background on you guys. Gilles, you can go first. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then Dan, you can take it from there.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me again. I appreciate that. My background is, I guess, as a young man, I was a very good athlete in the sport of hockey, badminton, snowboarding. I did every sport, volleyball, even though I was only 5'6". So I did a lot of sports, but I excelled really at the game of hockey, and I realized that I was not that great in first period and second period. I was getting pummeled all the time, but I had this third period energy, which of course was the cardiovascular was really high, and I was able to outbeat my opponent in the third period. So I felt like a regular Joe, just skating along first and second period, and third period I would just dominate the game. And that was the biggest difference for me. And I quickly found out that obviously I had a fifth gear that people didn't have. And eventually I grew out of hockey, and I couldn't go any further in the hockey career at 5'6". So I took out bodybuilding and did the bodybuilding thing, became the #1 bantamweight in Canada. And right around the age of around 30s, where my father had a heart attack and passed away. And me being in the bodybuilding, you concentrate on just hypertrophy. And at that point in my life, I decided, wow, I need to have a full balance scale in my health. And I decided to throw in some more cardio and some more nutrition, and start to really learn on how to age more gracefully. And then I took I was in the real estate game for 14 years, and in 2015 I decided to make the leap into personal training, and I did that quite well. But I was noticing that I was kind of shooting darts with client, going, wow, okay, well, I'll try this with the client, I'll try this with the client, I'll try this, and eventually I'll make my way to, oh, wow, this works. So it's a lot of taking an arrow and just shooting in the dark, and hopefully you hit the target. And then when I started to study a little bit more of the metabolic testing and so forth, I started really understanding a little bit more. And I was, wow, it would be nice to have a unit here. And then I had something tragic happen to me where I almost passed away, woke up intubated. And after that, I decided to take my life in my hands quite hard and start studying metabolic, and got me into PNOE. And now I'm an ultra trail runner. I do a lot of ultras throughout the year, and I got my life in really good balance. And I love teaching people like Dan that is very interested on changing their metabolic age backwards. So we don't want to age forward, we want to age backwards. And a lot of clientele and a lot of people don't necessarily want to live past 100, but they want to live the healthiest lifestyle until when they age. So when you see my 75-year-old client who can do 25 push-ups, and he's the same age as my mother and some of my uncles, and like there's no way they would be able to do 25 push-ups. It goes to show you the power of metabolic age and
Amen to
metabolic
that. And
efficiency.
indeed, incredible story. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing. Awesome. Danny, you wanna go and give us a little bit of background on yourself and what got you into the journey of aging backwards and aging
A-
the right
ab-
way?
Absolutely, absolutely. Aging backwards and
Mhm.
certainly inspiring me. And Jill, thanks for sharing your story. It was really following Gilles, where all this started for me. It was really following Gilles' story and his transformation online. Gilles was throughout this process of getting involved with PNOE and seeing sort of the experience that he was having and how he was transforming his own life that really brought me to reconnect with Gilles. Gilles and I had known each other for years. We were actually involved in a business together years ago, and one of my very first projects was Gilles was a partner of mine, and we lost touch for several years. And it was really watching Gilles' commitment to his own personal practice and the work that he was doing. And as I was seeing the impact and the results that he was having um, with his, we'll say, with the people that he was working with and training, that I was like, wow, I was like, this is really what I need personally. At the time, I had just turned 40. I'm now in my 40th year, and naturally, I'm starting to think a lot differently about my life and the trajectory of my life and where it's all going from here. Like Gilles, I had a family member that passed away very young. My mom died of cancer at 46. And so I'm having all of these big realizations, right? Like, wow, I'm 40. My mom died, 6 years from now. I'm like, really, how much of my life is left in front of me? And I really started to take it all a lot more seriously. I'll say it all got put in perspective, and it became quite clear as myself growing up, like Gilles, I'd always been an athlete, and I'd been involved in sports my whole life, and never at a very high level, but I was always about the team camaraderie, and I was the team captain and always the high five guy and encouraging everybody. But I played everything growing up. But I was asthmatic. And so when I grew up, I had asthma from a very young age. So exercise induced asthma. So when I would be active and running, as I was a young child, I remember feeling that constraint and having a challenge and struggle breathing, my whole life, especially while playing sports. And then it got to a point where I was playing actually college football, and I actually told myself, I was like, no, that's it. I don't have asthma anymore. I'm over it. I'm not going to take the puffers. I'm just going to sort of train myself out of it. And I built sort of the cardiovascular and lung capacity just to continue to performing at an elite level. And that lasted through my mid 20s. And then from about, I would say 25, 26 to now the age of 40, I got heavily involved in business. So I'm an entrepreneur, from commercial real estate to online coaching. I work with other entrepreneurs to help navigate the next steps of their business and life and to really live a more meaningful life. And as a part of that, my own health became, very apparent that I needed to make some changes. And so at 40, I was weighing, the heaviest I've ever been, at 210 pounds. The only thing that I had maintained was I continued to do yoga throughout those years. So I continued to maintain my mobility. And so, and I'm grateful for that, because I think I had a good base starting out as I reconnected with Gilles and started my training. I did have very good control, and we can talk about some of my initial tests. But in terms of endurance, in terms of I've lost the majority of my muscle, and it was really starting to feel quite daunting. And then I got, like so many of us, I got one of those digital scales
Mhm.
that told me my metabolic age for the first time. And
Okay.
not only am I turning 40 years old, but my digital scale is telling me that my metabolic age is 44,
Oh, yeah. That's a
which drove me crazy.
very, very powerful alarm, right?
Powerful alarm. And I'm like, this is not the idea. I certainly don't want to be any older than I actually am.
Indeed.
And I had another friend who, like Gilles, who's much older than me, but had actually gone through the process of reversing his metabolic age. And I, I learned from him, and I asked him sort of what the work that he was doing in terms of diet, nutrition, and for him, mobility was very important. And I not only, heard his stories, but I actually witnessed him getting younger, physically getting younger, and very much looking, he's in his mid 50s, and he looks about the same age as I do. And
Great for him.
great for him, right? And inspiring for me.
Yeah.
And so that really became the basis of my work and training with Gilles. And I saw really the work that PNOE was doing at, from a performance perspective. And as I was connecting with Gilles, I was like, Gilles, this is and has, and I think will always be about metabolic age for me. Right now, I'm not an elite level athlete. I'm a 40-year-old dad who's running several companies. I'm in an awesome relationship, married in an awesome relationship. I simply want to be able to continue to show up for many more years to come. And as a part of this, sort of reversing my metabolic age and being in my best possible shape so that I can continue to be an active participant in my own life. I'm like, that's what it's about for me. So with that, I reached out to Gilles. We did the first, Gilles brought me in to do the initial set of testing, and it was really amazing to see the results for the first time. And as we go through that, there was some big takeaways that as we start to put data, even to sort of the starting point and where I was at, it was really amazing as to what the data and indicators were telling us in terms of really sort of how far things have gone for me, but also that, a part of my base was still there. And when we did that first initial test, Gilles looked at it and he's like, were you an athlete? And I was like, yeah, my whole life. He's like, we could see that. And he looked at the data and he said, listen, he said, did you have asthma? And yeah, go ahead.
I will be honest with you. I also just looked at your tests about an hour ago for the first time.
Okay.
Gilles, you sent them over yesterday, but I just didn't have the time. But I actually spent some time prior to our call, and indeed, VO2 max was quite good for the story that I just heard.
Yeah.
A person who has been, checked out from working out and fitness for 10 years, is living a very intense life, the entrepreneurial life, but still maintains a VO2 max of 41 at the age of 40, despite being overweight, is certainly, commendable, and indeed a testament to the fact that there is definitely a cardiovascular base there that is, inheritance from, from your days as an athlete, right? And then the other thing that I also have to highlight is that indeed the next thing that I looked at, because we look at it a lot here in PNOE, is, how are the lungs working? And indeed, vital capacity was quite compromised. I didn't know about the asthma, but, I would ask you myself, like, was there any, respiratory limitation growing up, some sort of respiratory pathology? So yeah, it's great to hear that, it's all coming together.
Yeah, exactly. And Gilles was able to pick up on that in that initial testing, which it's just from the very beginning, the data was very empowering, right? The data said to me from the very first time that I met to Gilles, like, hey, we see your potential. And we see your limitations. We see the areas that we can improve, right? That blew my mind. Were you an athlete? Did you have asthma? Yes, yes, right. And then very specifically that, Gilles was able to provide to me a very strategic recommendation as how we could go towards improving these certain indicators and metrics. And for me, as a business guy, I'm like, it's always about the data. And generally, when it comes to our own health, like Gilles said, we're throwing, darts in the dark, and we don't have access to these metrics where we can actually even sort of have an indication of how we're really doing, and to truly understand if we're making an impact.
100%. So perhaps we can start showing some data and, put a little bit of picture into all of these insights. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and we can start with initial test. All right. Here's Dan's initial test, and we can clearly see VO2, VCO2, red line, VO2, blue line, expressed in kilograms per milliliter per minute. And we can clearly see what, we were discussing earlier, that his VO2 peak reaches about anywhere between 41 and 42 at the very peak. It's clearly a maximal test. His RER, respiratory exchange ratio, reached well over 1. Specifically, during the peak of the test, he was at about 1.1 to 1.2, which indicates that Dan, you were almost out of breath at that point in time. And then the other interesting thing that we talked about, which is going to be quite interesting to visualize, is VT. VT stands for tidal volume. This is the total amount of air Dan is exhaling from his lungs every breath cycle, which is a very good indicator of how well he's utilizing his lungs. As we can see, Dan is breathing about 2.8 liters out, and then obviously gradually increasing as exercise intensity increases, and then he reaches something around 3.3 to 3.5 during the maximal state. Now, for a person like Dan, that could have been a lot more. And Gilles, you can step in and give us a little bit of insight as to how was it just VT, or did you also look at other metrics to basically point to Dan and be like, hey, is there a pulmonary problem that we should know about?
Well, his FEV1, which is the expiratory power, was low. When you divide the total lung capacity and the FEV1, the power, it gave me 74%. So I knew that he should have been around 81 was a predictor. So he was off by 6 or 7 percentile. So his FEV1 was low. So I knew that was going to be a limiter and something we're going to have to work on. That's expiratory power muscles to work on some RMT training, some respiratory muscle training. So, but I was quite surprised that he had full coordination. Yes, he had a limitation in FEV1, but he was only I'd say about 95% of the client that I test, they don't have the capability, no coordination. He had full coordination. And I even said to him, like, after the test was over, I was like, you playing around with your breathing? Because I'm like, I know you told me you had yoga background, and I was like, he was breathing at 85% of his FEV1, which was remarkable for someone who hasn't trained in that cardiovascular. And he's like, yeah, I was. And he admitted, you'll see those 3 loops, the 3 big ones that are in about the 3.6 liter VT. And he was actually going, yeah, I was just breathing in deep to see what would happen. And sure enough, he had the control. So I knew, I was like, wow, this guy actually has full control. And then after that, it's just going to be basically working on his expiratory power.
Sure. And, we can clearly see here Dan's breathing frequency, which is, quite well controlled indeed.
Going in the linear, going towards the up and towards the end.
Exactly. So, one of the other things that we pick up a lot is erratic breathing. People who are not able to, effectively control their expiratory muscles, that may be due to a multitude of factors. It's going to be anything from it's how people have been accustomed to breathing. It's anxiety in many cases, or in several cases, like people not having undergone specific training about how they should be breathing, which is something that very few of us have actually undergone, right?
Mm.
So yeah, indeed, this is something that we can clearly see here. So Gilles, why don't you tell us a little bit about, you know, these are, you know, maybe the basic insights, or we can perhaps add here, and then what was the plan, the course of action after receiving this information?
Well, after I got the information, number one was to improve his, mobility. I
Mhm,
thought there might have been a mobility issue. After
mhm,
assessing that, wasn't
mhm,
a mobility issue.
mhm,
Then we did. I put him on a TRX program that we did about 3 to 4 times a week, including some interval training.
mhm,
I wanted to increase his fat utilization in his zone two. His zone two was weak. He only went up to I believe it was 132.
yeah,
So his heart rate at 132 switched fuel sources. So we knew we had to fix that and extend that.
indeed. You know, I'm pulling up his fat and carbohydrate
Mhm,
utilization here.
mhm.
Carbohydrate
And
utilization being the turquoise, and then fat utilization being the dark
mhm,
green. As you know, we can see fat utilization is rapidly going down, you know,
mhm,
as expected for most people. As exercise intensity is going to go up, our muscles will turn to glucose, carbohydrates,
mhm,
as the main source of fuel, and then as you know, that's why this thing is going up, and then fat is going down. But
and he
problem,
flatlined quite a bit at the bottom. You'll see, he flatlines in the fat utilization and is strictly 100%.
mhm,
Almost 100% of the carbohydrates.
exactly.
They're right
So
around the 170
mhm,
to
mhm,
his max.
yeah, so right around 170 and above, Dan was burning purely carbohydrates, or almost
Mhm,
exclusively carbohydrates.
correct.
Um, and then the crossover occurs somewhere around 135 to 136. This is the point in time, the exercise intensity above which fat utilization becomes less predominant than carbohydrate utilization.
Mhm.
So, Gilles, you know, that was one of the things you also wanted to address through your training, right? Mhm,
Correct. Yeah. So that was one of the things that we talked about.
mhm,
Where Dan was is an awesome guy. I told him what we need to do. We need a watch or a strap. And boom! The next day he's got his watch and
good.
heart rate monitor.
Mhm,
He's ready for action. So we knew right away that that's where we needed to do. One of the things that we needed to do in his protocol training.
mhm,
So FEV1 is just power. So we're going to work all the expiratory muscles that's needed
mhm,
to hopefully increase that to I think he was at 3.84 liters. We need to increase that to above 4. And the zone 2, I wanted to see that into the 140s, and he agreed he'd like to see that. And there's a few other things. Obviously his coordination was bang on, so we didn't have to do any coordination training. I figured that once we increase the FEV1, his coordination would just continue
mhm,
with the new statistics of the FEV1.
mhm.
And
Um,
of course,
so sorry, go ahead.
and we did do the a lot of zone 2 training together,
Mhm,
and a lot of TRX and
mhm,
some interval, because I found that his fat utilization was only about 8. I think at his max was like 8.9 calories per minute,
mhm,
and it went really down fast into like the sixes,
mhm,
6.5, I think, like for a long period of time. And so I knew that I'd need to do some interval training into zone 4, zone 5s, and keep him in there just long enough to kickstart, let's call it kickstart that metabolic system up, so he can start using fat for longer and use more calories.
awesome. Cool. So, approximately how long did this program last, and what was kind of the, you know, benchmark that you had for retesting down the road?
Then you want to start? I think we did our first test. I think it was March 1st, and then retested in May, which was
Mhm,
it's about an 8 week to 9 weeks difference.
Mhm.
And we're actually ready for another test, which I assume that we're going to see another big increase in his VO2 max, body fat, yeah, everything. I think on this one, by my experience, by what I see in Dan, I
Mhm.
know it's going to be a big increase. Can't
Mhm.
wait to see it.
Yeah. Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience through this process? Like, how did it feel, referring to the actual training that you underwent, working with Gilles, and, you know, how did it feel specifically, from the vantage point of training with a specific program that has been structured, based on specific data points, and yeah, how was that process experience for you?
Well, it's beyond engaging,
Okay.
right? When you can start, we talked about the first day and the first test that I did with Gilles. And sort of I mentioned the word that I was like, how empowering this was. But what I mean by that is that when you have access to the actual information and you can see these numbers and the graphs and stats and have this level of trust in that hey, these are my indicators. This is where I'm truly at today. And then you get this recommendation back from your trainer, in this case, Gilles, that says, and these are the 3 or 4 things. It was very specific. I think there was 4 or 5, recommendations on the protocol that we, set out to do together. And, when Gilles said I went and bought my watch the next day, I'm like, yeah, when you provide this level of detailed information and can clearly say, and this is the training that we're going to recommend to help get us to the next level, and this is what's actually possible for you, then there's no doubt that I was very motivated, and beyond that, I was inspired. Like I could see, the potential that I had, and I could see quite clearly where I could go. So how did it feel? I actually believed that I could be in the best shape of my life. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes we tell ourselves that, or we set these lofty goals, and, we set out to, to get back to the shape that we were in when we were kids or young, or, when we were playing sports in college. But I actually believed that I could get to that point. And then we set out on doing this work together. And I think the combination of zone 2 training, interval training, and training our zone 4 and 5s, the work that we did in with the TRX, it all just felt very sustainable and doable for me.
Yeah.
At my age, at 40, I've done a ton of weightlifting and training for college level football.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now at 40, I feel like I can do the TRX
Mm-hmm.
all day long.
Mm-hmm.
The only issue with zone 2 training is can you allocate and dedicate the time and be disciplined enough to put the time aside to do your zone 2 training, on a regular basis, as often as you need to,
Mm-hmm.
during the week. And for the interval training with zone 4 or 5, that's the work that I did with Gilles,
Mm.
specifically the TRX or the zone 2. So my commitment in training and working out with Gilles, once I had these empowering stats, I said, hey, Gilles, like, I'm going to sign up. I'm going to come train with you 3 to 4 times a week. We're going to do this together. I'd like for you to be my accountability partner to ensure that it happens. And if I'm, canceling a session, I want you to ask me why. Right. Like I'm in, I'm committed, but that started with having access to, this report. And generally, when you're starting out with any sort of new training program, you don't have access to this. You just have a picture on the wall of the type of guy, that you would like to be, or the type of guy that you'd like to look like. But that really feels like a hope and a prayer, whereas this really felt tangible for me.
Indeed.
Really, it
Yeah.
really made it feel like it was possible.
Yeah. Seeing is certainly believing, and seeing under
Mhm.
the hood, uh, especially empowers people to realize that, this is exactly what the problem is. And, seeing what the problem is certainly makes the solution something that is much more tangible, as you very well said. And I think the other, part that I would really like to highlight, because this is something that we talk about a lot here at PNOE, is the fact that training is a prescription, in the sense that
Mhm.
It cannot be provided generically, just like, we don't show up to a doctor and the
Yeah.
doctor gives us, whatever drug blindly. It has a very specific uh, uh, algorithm, so to speak, that ends up with the recommendation that we need to take this drug. Exercises, and nutrition are the two most potent drugs that we have in order to better our health and, age backwards, as we said earlier. And so training, when we approach training in a very structured way that is data driven, that includes all different types of training, interval, resistance, and base training, uh, everything is important for every type of goal, then we can create something that is sustainable for the body, sustainable for a person's metabolism. And as
That's
when
right.
it becomes sustainable for the body, as Dan very well pointed out, it becomes sustainable for one's lifestyle as well. And it ceases being a toil and becomes something that you look forward to.
Yeah, for sure. And that's certainly been my experience. And then after experiencing that for 7 or 8, or in my case, I think it was 9 weeks, then the fact that you can go back to retest and you can actually see the progress that you are making.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas physically, you might not be losing as much weight as you would like to be, right? After 8 or 9 weeks. But for me, I kept telling Gilles, I was like, in terms of my respiratory, I feel strong. Like I feel like I'm ready to run in terms of my muscles. Like I feel like the work that we've done with the TRX, I feel like things are activated. I feel very different.
Mm-hmm.
And I might not be getting all the comments from, people in the street saying, hey, what are you doing? Are you on some sort of diet? Like I wasn't getting that type of feedback, but I felt very different. And then when we did our retest, the retest showed just how much progress I had made.
Yeah.
Which was the encouragement, right, to keep going.
Yeah, definitely. And for a lot of people, which is also a great point that you're bringing up, which gives me the opportunity to highlight, it's the fact that a lot of people need to lose weight, right? But losing weight is a very intense process for the human body because energy imbalance, which is necessary for weight loss, is something that is going to stress your body a lot. It's a state in which we're not supposed to be at. Just like we're not supposed to be in a calorie surplus and gain weight, we're not supposed to be in a calorie deficit and lose weight, because either or is something that our bodies, naturally going to try and fight. And
Right.
as a result, because we have to, get into that state in order to lose weight, we need to prep effectively. And there's many cases where one isn't ready to start losing weight. They actually need to, strengthen their lungs. They need to rebuild their metabolism. They need to, change something that is actually keeping them from going into the weight loss process and being set up for success. And, I think, Danny, you're making a great point here, which is the fact that, it's not just the weight loss part, which, inevitably has to happen. It's also about all of the preparation that we need to do in order to step into that process and being fully prepared.
I love that. That's a great point. And throughout this process, Gilles really encouraged me to, I would say, build on my strengths. So a lot of us, we set out where I want to lose weight. So we focus on losing weight, and then we induce all the behaviors to quote unquote lose weight. Whereas through this experience, Gilles encouraged me every time we go to a training session, he'd be like, man, like he's like, your legs are so strong. You've got strong triceps. He's like, your VO2 max, like for your age, he's like, it's incredible. And then so he built this program, focused on my strengths, which then all of a sudden, as I'm building on my strengths, then everything is improving. And then naturally in time, now I'm starting to lose weight, but I'm not trying to lose weight.
Yeah.
I'm focusing more on building strength, focusing more on building cardiovascular strength and endurance. And now the weight is falling off.
100%. And it becomes a natural consequence, because let's take, like, what Dan just explained and break it down to the very fundamental terms of the human body. Dan had a problem doing cardio because from a respiratory perspective, he was somehow impaired. By strengthening his respiratory system, Dan is now able to do more cardio effectively. As a result, he's burning more calories when doing cardio without necessarily stressing out during cardio more, or without necessarily spending more time doing cardio. As a result, Dan is having a higher caloric burn during the day. As a result, Dan is naturally losing weight without actually having to go on a diet. So this is a very specific example of how I had a problem and I fixed it, and now I can actually go to losing weight naturally.
And on the point with what I do with my clients, and I did with Dan, is that I had, obviously we have at PNO‍ය, we have so many stats, but I picked 3 and 4 to work on that would motivate Dan, for one, to keep him coming back. And the important ones that I wanted to make change right away, of course, the important ones. So, I didn't tell him that, oh, we need to increase your fat max at 8.9 calories per minute. We want that at a 10. And, I didn't want to just throw in all those stats. I knew by doing some of the intervals that would make changes. And then after the second test, we would pick 3 or 4 more things to work on. And
Definitely.
so that's important, to not overwhelm the person that's doing the test and doing the work after the test is done, of course, to not overwhelm them that we're going to pick 10 of them and we're going to work on all 10. It's like a golfer, a professional golfer. You can't tweak 5 things all at once, because the golf swing would end up being like all a little crooked. So you got to fix, part, and then boom, we fix that. All right, on to number 2, and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's actually see what the after test looked like for Dan. So we have VO2 and VCO2 again here. Let's start with VO2 max, which is, the most powerful predictor for longevity, and it's what we also use in PNOE, and what others use as well in order to calculate biological age. And in the previous test, Dan scored at about 41 to 42 milliliters per kilogram per minute of body weight. And in this case, we went all the way up to 47 to almost 48, which is roughly 7 to 8 milliliters per minute per kilogram of body weight increase. Now, this is a pretty significant increase for that period of time, and that equates to about 7 to 10 years reduction in biological age. So if your biological age, say, was like 45, you're now down to 35. So you're about 5 years younger from your actual chronological age, which is ultimately the reason why Dan got into that process. Some people are training for an Ironman, a Spartan race, whatever, but most of us are training for life, as we call it, and that's perhaps the best indicator of whether we're heading the right direction or not. So VO2 max, great increase. Now, what was also quite astonishing is the increase in tidal volume. In the previous graph, we're seeing that right around that point of intensity, Dan was working at about 2.8. Yeah. So we're at 3.3, 3.4 now. So that's half a liter of more lung capacity that is being utilized. That is tremendously more oxygen that's available for Dan's system. That means more ability to produce physical work. That means Dan can run more. Dan can run at higher intensities. Dan can burn more calories, easier to lose weight, or easier to, have fun during exercise, or do whatever, whatever else physical exercise requires.
You may not need an afternoon nap after you exercise.
Exactly. Or you don't need a nap after your exercise. Exactly. And then at peak, Dan gets to 4.37 liters. Previously, we're about 3.8. So that, half a liter is actually very well maintained. So this is probably due to the fact that Dan stepped into the process with pretty good coordination and control, which is something that most people don't have. And I
Yeah,
think, you know,
he hit almost 100% of his FEV one. Obviously, his FEV one went up, and he was able to tap like that. You know, to have that coordination, not everybody can get into the 90%. And I think he was in his zone 3 or 4 at that point where he hit that
correct,
4.3 liters. Yeah.
And I think the last part that we should see here is the crossover, which is an indication of how, you know, good Dan is in terms of burning fat now. Previously, Dan was crossing at about 138 beats per minute.
I gave him 132, but yeah, it's up for discussion.
Yeah.
But I might, so right around 136, 37, it could have been. Yeah.
Yeah. But now we can clearly see that the crossover occurs at 148, which is 10 beats per minute upwards. That means that all of the metabolic profile has shifted towards fat oxidation. That means that Dan can actually burn more fat while doing exercise because his capillaries are thicker, are more dense, mitochondria are more trained. As a result, he can rely on fat as a fuel source for much longer periods of time, for a greater range of intensities. As a result, fat oxidation goes up overall throughout the day and during exercise. So these were the 3 points that were brought up in the first test, and we can clearly see how there was clear improvement in all of these 3 areas. As Jill said, there's another test that's coming up soon. We're excited.
Another test. Yeah. And there's things like Dan didn't know about that I want to see with what I put him through. I want to see if I was going to get the calories to go up, his fat calories. Now, it didn't go up past 8.9. However, instead of dropping down to in the 6s of fat utilization per minute calories, I was able to get him to keep him in the 8s for quite a long time, into 7s, and it didn't drop down to like low 6s. So that was an improvement that I never really told him about, because that's not on our priority list. But I was pretty happy with that outcome. And another thing that besides the zone 2, his VO2 pulse went up. So every time your heart beats, how much oxygen is being pumped, right? So that went from a 23, which was still very impressive, 23, to now he hit a 27, and during the test, I do believe, 27 point.
Correct.
So that was very good for his test on this one. And I can't wait to see what his test is going to be now, because we did a actual 5-kilometer run this week. That was his first 5K, and I don't know how long, Dan. Maybe you want to, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
So I see big changes in body fat percentage. There's going to be changes in FEV1. There's going to be a lot of changes to do this next test, which we'll be doing within the next couple of weeks.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Cool. Yeah. Just a little bit of insight for our listeners here. O2 pulse is the amount of oxygen that a person's heart pumps into the body per heartbeat. And typically we use this metric in order to understand cardiovascular health. In clinical settings where they use breath analysis to evaluate cardiovascular health, O2 pulse is one of the key metrics for identifying coronary artery disease. So in case there's like a blockage in someone's heart that is preventing the heart as a muscle to receive oxygen and beat, then we can see a flattening and then a decline in O2 pulse as exercise intensity increases. So in this case here, if we ever saw, God forbid, Dan's O2 pulse like headed downwards as exercise intensity was increasing, we would certainly be alarming him and asking him to do some sort of nuclear imaging or some sort of more advanced testing in order to see if his heart is okay. But
Mhm.
in this case, we're seeing clear linear trend
Mhm.
upwards, not
Mhm.
really anything to be concerned about.
And
Uh,
with Dan, because of his coordination,
mm,
and I know that when you have so much coordination, when I train someone in my respiratory program
mhm,
and they have coordination like Dan, I have to ask, okay, when did you manipulate the system, right? Because I can manipulate climbing a hill by increasing my VO2 max by deep breath and
mhm,
increasing my breathing frequency. And
mhm,
as you see that VO2 pulse,
mhm,
if I go back, I can surely that would be when he was breathing nice and deep at
mhm.
4.36 liters,
Yeah,
where Dan was trying to be Superman and
yeah,
using his yoga moves.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Is
it's fantastic because it's only maybe 5% of the people. Well, only 3 people so far have ever got coordination at 100% like Dan,
Mhm,
and to be as coordinated as Dan, I think
mhm,
he's the only one that didn't have
mhm,
any
mhm.
check marks where I said, oh well, we can increase the zone 3 breathing frequency a little bit, but him, I didn't have to do any of that.
Yeah,
Just focus on the other areas.
awesome.
Mm.
Well, that was great, guys. I much enjoyed it. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today to go over Dan's case. And Dan, thank you so much for sharing all of these insights. We put a lot of material out there for health professionals, but we started to present consumer views as well, because at the end of the day, you are the ultimate recipient of this service and this wealth of information. So thank you so much for joining us today and discussing all of that insight with us.
Absolutely. It's been a great experience, and it's my pleasure, and I'm grateful that the technology exists and that there's trainers like Gilles out there in the world who are doing this work, because I think it's, like I said, I think it's beyond empowering, and it's incredible just to see what we can measure
Mm-hmm.
these days, and how
Mm-hmm.
much that can motivate us to make this real change. So
100%.
thank you. It was my pleasure.
Of course, of course. Jules, thank you again. It was a pleasure having you again today, and I look forward to staying in touch. Okay.
Oh, thanks for having me and Dan. And Dan, I look forward to our run tomorrow.
I'll see you bright and early.
Say bright and early tomorrow morning.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Panos.